It's a much different role, and I think those roles can be complementary. But the role of somebody in a distinct minority, not only as folks running as Democrats, but as socialists, is much more advocacy, and it's much more calling out the terrible things that are happening, but also having those fights and trying to put them in the larger context that Darrin is so good at in terms of saying, this is not just this is a bad policy or a horrific or a terrible policy, we should vote against it, but because this is rooted in capitalism, this is why we need to change the system behind it. We need systemic change, not just nibbling around the edges and trying to reform things that are not going to work because they're never going to work.
Welcome back to Cream City Social. The voice you just heard was Ryan Clancy, explaining to us what his and Darrin's role will be if, or I should say when, they both win their state representative primaries on August 9th, which is exactly what we're going to be talking about this week. DSA has 2 candidates endorsed in their races for state assembly. Darrin Madison, who's running in District 10, which runs from Shorewood over to 35th Street, and Ryan Clancy, who is running in District 19, which runs along the lake from UWM down to Bayview. And I take this interview solo, so you're stuck with Will this time, me. But before we kick it off, let me run through a couple of announcements that we need to voice. Number 1, if you've been listening, and you're a great human if you have, Ryan Clancy is no stranger. If you haven't, or you want a refresher, I'll point you to episodes 3 and 4 of this season, where we talk to him about his upcoming supervisor race in episode 3, and then in episode 4, he is joined by the 2 other DSA-endorsed candidates, Juan Miguel, who I'm happy to say is now the county supervisor of District 12, and Eric Rolhelm, who lost in what I like to call a very moral victory against a millionaire, a 3-time incumbent. Eric got over 40% of the vote. Absolutely amazing. Check them out. You'll get an even better picture of who is running to represent us. Number 2, Darrin's voice is just a tiny bit muffled in this interview. He was being a good human, wearing a mask and taking the necessary precautions to keep us all safe. Honestly, if I didn't say anything, I'm not even sure you could tell. But as the PMC would say, I just want to manage your expectations. And last, but certainly not least, I want to highlight something that came up towards the end of our interview, where we talked about how Ryan is again running unopposed in his race. This also happened in his most recent county supervisor race in April. It's almost eerie, like no one wants to dance with Ryan at the 8th grade dance. I don't know if that Green Day t-shirt is doing what you think it's doing, Ryan. And as he'll tell you himself, he thinks this is all because his potential opponents don't want the embarrassment of losing to the door-knocking machine that's become Milwaukee DSA. One of the craziest pieces of this puzzle is that District 19, the one he's running for, is one of, if not the highest, fundraising district in Wisconsin for Democrats. Think about that for a second. That means that his opponents were so afraid of losing to Ryan, or as he would say it, DSA, that they decided to give up on one of their biggest cash cows because they were too afraid to lose to DSA. To us. Again, let that sink in for a minute. That's getting into the territory of real political power. Shit, that is real political power. So, if you need any more reasons to roll up your sleeves, take a clipboard and go talk to the people that make up our city, this is it. It works and it matters. And I can honestly say it's pretty fun. There will be a link in the description for how you can get involved with canvassing. All right, enough blabbering. What comes next is a very honest conversation with 2 people making positive change in Milwaukee. Well, welcome, guys. Thanks for sitting down and talking to us.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, glad to be here.
And so we're talking to Ryan and Darrin today about their state assembly races. We've got 2 races coming up, and the primaries are when exactly?
Yeah, August 9th?
Yeah, August 9th
Yeah.
is the primary, and that's the big one for Darrin especially.
And why is the primary so important for you, and maybe not so much for Ryan?
Yeah, for sure. So, as it relates to my district, right, it is 82% Democratic. So everything will be decided in the primary. And there also is not a Republican candidate running in the district. So it's just between me and my opponent.
Yeah, who is your opponent? How many opponents are there?
Yeah, so there's me and one other opponent, Brian Kennedy. He is the mayor of Glendale. And Glendale actually got redistricted into the 10th district. It used to be Milwaukee and Shorewood. And before that, it was actually just Milwaukee. So it's been an interesting few waves of redistricting that has further and further been an attempt to reduce the voting power of marginalized communities. And I'm so sorry.
In classic rock. Can you talk a little bit about those marginalized communities? Or what does that mean to take voting power away?
Yeah, for sure. So as we think about, the marginalized communities in the 10th district, it used to be a majority black district. And it used to be considered I forgot what they're called, like an opportunity district, right? There are 5 opportunity districts in the state of Wisconsin.
Does that mean black districts?
Not only black districts. So there are black and Latinx districts. There was a huge fight related to the voting power of Latinx folks on the South Side as well. And that's been dealt with, been a fight that's been happening both at the state level and local level, in terms of the city council, as well.
Yeah. Huh.
Yeah.
So the voting power is getting diminished. I saw that District 10 now runs from Shorewood all the way west to 35th Street. And so it does seem to have 2 different kind of worlds in it. 3 different types of worlds.
Yeah.
I was thinking the lakeside world, those beautiful houses in Shorewood, and then you got closer to 35th Street, a little less nice, little closer, less close to the lake.
True. I'd also argue that there's a difference between the daily life of folks who live in Glendale and the daily life of folks who live in Shorewood, and then vice versa in Milwaukee. There's also a lot of similarities, and I think that it's important to have representation that has an understanding of all of those values.
And how do you have, not how do you, like how to put you on the spot here, but how do you interact with all 3 of those different worlds?
For sure. So I have been doing organizing since I was 14 years old. And, primarily that has been in Milwaukee, but that's also been done in Shorewood and Glendale as well. Back in 2010, there was a situation in Shorewood where a young person was about to be expelled over a chicken nugget.
Chicken nugget.
Over chicken nuggets. You could look it up on Google right now. Like Shorewood chicken nuggets.
Fiasco. 2010.
Yeah. And there was, a situation where young people from across the city, specifically from across the city of Milwaukee and across the North Shore, right, including Glendale and Shorewood, came together to really fight on behalf of that young person, to ensure that not only he wasn't expelled, but also didn't face criminal charges for receiving lunch from a friend of his. So the situation ends up playing out like this, right?
And what happened?
Adam's sitting in the lunchroom. A good friend of his was fasting, because of his religion.
Sure.
So he offered him his chicken nuggets. So the Shorewood student, goes to, gets back in the line, gets a sauce for those chicken nuggets, and the lunch lady, tells him that he's stealing, right? Well, doesn't tell him that he's stealing. tells the principal, and the principal calls the cops.
Oh, geez.
Adam gets arrested, and then he's about to be expelled. And there was a long fight to both ensure that Adam didn't have to deal with any of this because all it really took was them having a conversation, and that didn't happen, right?
It just escalated so quickly. There was no time to just talk about what happened and what did happen there. So he just gave his chicken nugget to a friend who was fasting for his religion, and then somebody got upset that he went through the line and he was stealing sauce for the chicken nugget that he had gotten or he had given.
He had been given. So his friend who had been fasting gave up his lunch because he couldn't eat for religious purposes. Right? Gave it to Adam. Adam was like, okay, awesome. Let me go get another sauce, right? Lunch lady was like, you've already gotten a lunch. Yeah. What you doing? Right? And he ends up, getting persecuted, and the fight began, and we were able to win on behalf of Adam and ensure that he didn't face those charges, and really begin a conversation around re-examining the process of discipline in public education. And that started a bigger fight related to the Student Bill of Rights here in Wisconsin, which was a big fight from 2011 to 2013 in trying to get young people to push for the state to ensure inalienable rights for young people in public schools and so on. So I mean, I could talk.
That's so interesting, and I want to ask you. Hopefully, we can get to it later. What that work actually looks like when you're actually doing it. Yeah. But maybe a quick takeaway from that: why didn't that conversation happen between Alex and the principal, or Alex and just the school lunch teacher, or just Adam? Somebody?
I think at the end of the day, young people's agency. Young people are never given their agency. As we think about systematic oppression, young people face their own, just like other marginalized communities, right? As we think about, specifically adultism, right? Where we believe that, young people need the full guidance of young people, of adults in their life to, give, to help them navigate their past, right? And there's some truth to that, but there's also some oppression that comes through that, right? Because when we talk consistently about the needs of young people without bringing them to the table, right? It becomes an argument of proxy as opposed to actually asking young people what they need and giving them the ability to strategize and create the models that they want to see to ensure their own success. And that's I've committed my life to fighting systematic oppression, from racism to heterosexism to ableism to capitalism, and all of them, right? And specifically as we think about young people, they have a huge role in really building not only our future but our present to its fullest capacity. So,
see, and this is why I'm here for the Darrin Madison campaign and jumping in with both feet. It is, and I hadn't heard this particular, anecdote about Darrin's advocacy, but it doesn't surprise me. Darrin Madison, his whole life has been a fierce and powerful advocate for his community, and it doesn't just end with that one student, right? It's amazing to me the way that he's able to connect those dots, and then to move from that one student to students, to youth, to the community generally, and then put it in the larger context of why it's happening, and anti-capitalism and socialism, and it's fantastic, and I really appreciate your ability to do that.
Thanks a billion.
And as you're talking, Ryan, you're making me think of, this is the perfect segue into exactly what you're doing right now, Darrin. You're the youth program director for Urban Underground.
I'm not
correct?
Anymore.
No, not anymore.
So I've spent the past year, past technically 6 months working for the African American Roundtable as their democracy organizer.
Okay.
But I did spend 3 years as the program director for Urban Underground, really spearheading our program, Yo Milwaukee, Youth Organizing Milwaukee,
Sure.
and on the other end of that, doing advocacy at the county, state, and federal level as it relates to the closing of youth prisons.
Okay, I've
And
heard about this youth prison.
yeah, so that work, Urban Underground has a huge, huge place in my heart, and that's why the experiences that I've gotten through that work, and the relationships I've developed, with the broader community has pushed me into this moment.
Yeah. How does that how does that work building the how does that work building the trust in the community like that? So you've been working in the community for about 14 years. Is there a through line that you've noticed in working in all these community development, working on the ground with people that you're trying to bring to this representative spot?
Yeah.
Is there
Um.
something special in this perspective?
Yeah, for sure. So there is, it all comes down to relational organizing. When it comes to creating policy that aligns with the values of people, it's truly understanding, the needs of them, and that doesn't come through, simply, reading a study and
Mm-hmm.
um, seeing the analysis of the issues, but really going into space with folks and seeing, their plight, and working with them to build a strategy to create the change that they want to see. One philosophy that I carry with me in all the work that I do is, the fact that, those who are most impacted by the problem are the closest to the solutions. So I always try and center them in that work. And, if we don't have folks in the state legislature and any elected office that doesn't center the community, center people, we are consistently going to lose. And we're going to lose because we will implement models that won't work for people. We've done it before. We
I
consistently
feel like
do
I
it.
see that
We
often.
we overinvest in policing. You know, we also, spend time developing programs and workforce
Mm-hmm.
development opportunities that don't connect and don't work for people, and people question why folks don't aren't getting it aren't get don't have enough don't have living wage jobs, aren't going to this workforce development training, aren't doing these things because these models that we've been implementing don't work in their current form. So we need to adjust and pivot alongside folks so that we can build what actually works.
And pulling Ryan into the conversation, is that what you imagine happening at the state legislative level? Do you imagine working with these different ideas, these different ideologies with people and trying to have working relationships with them? What kind of relationships does this look like
Yeah,
going forward?
it depends on the issue. And I think one of the things that Darrin and I have in common is looking at data and trying to figure out what works rather than just what sounds good on paper. Because, yeah, often the things that politicians try is that they pass something that's nice and new and shiny.
Sounds nice.
Right. And then, sometimes there are things that are sitting right in front of us, which
Yep.
we're just not supporting or funding. So if you look at like the Credible Messengers program for Milwaukee County, has a 40 or 50 person child waiting list in order to get on this program. And the data is incredible. I mean, it's a child gets into trouble rather than locking them up forever, which we know does not work based on the data
Mm-hmm.
to reduce crime. We pair them up with a mentor who gets some opportunities, employment, and then functions as a really solid, trusted individual adult in their lives. And yet we can't seem to find the money for that. Only recently have we been, putting a few more dollars into that.
Yep.
But that's just it. I mean, because it's been around for a while, nobody wants to champion that
It's not new and
and put money
sexy.
into it. Right? It's nothing new that people can take credit for. But I think to the larger point, I mean, it depends on the issue. There are some things that we don't and should not compromise on.
I wonder
There are
about
other
that, yeah.
things that I think that we can get past. So, for instance, the right to counsel that I did at the county level. I would love to see that statewide. I was able to pass it unanimously on a bipartisan basis at the county. I would absolutely see the utility for that being statewide. Not only would it take the onus off of paying for it from the city of Milwaukee and Milwaukee County, but there are folks all across the state that are affected by both eviction and foreclosure, which is an issue too. My original vision for that covered both of those and did not have any hoops to jump through in terms of income. That would really benefit all of Wisconsin and Milwaukee.
Yes. And so maybe let's take a step back real fast and talk about that's what we would do at the state level. But right now you're a county supervisor for District 3 and you're running for District 4. Sorry, correct me if I'm wrong. For District 4 and you're running for District
19.
District 19
is the
at the
assembly
state level. Why are you running for state level office? I think that we just talked to you 9 months ago, and we have you on very good recordings of wanting to stay at the local level, thinking you have a lot to do here. What opportunity does the state level have for us?
Absolutely, and I got to be clear, I still have a lot to do here. I have a ton of irons in the fire. I'm not going anywhere, at least for the rest of that 2 years. But there have been many times at the county, because essentially the county is an arm of the state, right? So at the city level...
You explain it like that.
Yeah, the city folks can do whatever they want unless the state prohibits it. Us at the county, and we can get creative with it. I know we've done a lot of good things. We can only do what the state lets us do, what they prescribe to us. So it's a different relationship. And there have been many times within that role that I've run up against walls, and I've gotten creative with it. But if you look at eviction again, right? My original idea coming into office was, what if we make it a little bit more painful for landlords to evict tenants? And I talked to our lawyers at the county, and I'm like, hey, why don't we double or maybe triple the amount of fees that a landlord has to pay? Why don't we take that money and put it into housing? Like, that would make a lot of sense. She's like, that's a great idea. You can't do that. Those are all prescribed by the state. That's a state law. So literally every week something comes up where I'm like, I wish somebody at the state would champion this. This is the ability to do that, especially with Darrin and with other allies there. Yeah. There's no reason that I can't take the insight that I've gotten at the county and continue to roll that into changing those state laws, and then ideally providing both Milwaukee County and the city of Milwaukee and other places that need it more autonomy to govern themselves.
You talk about it in your platform, the status of serious juvenile offenders, right? Which it creates a necessary pathway for, it creates a pathway that can't be diverted from, for young people to have to go to Lincoln Hills and Copper Lake, as opposed to
you kind of just get stuck on that track. You kind of just get stuck on that track.
Yep. So it forces judges to say, like, we have to send a young person to Lincoln Hills, instead of saying, like, we can send them to this diversion program. There's several amazing diversion programs that exist throughout the state. And, we can't send a huge portion of young people there because of the serious juvenile offender status. And then as we think about this other level of issues, some young people, because we don't have some models in the state, they're actually shipped out of the state. And that's even more heinous as we talk about, like, young people's families having access to their young people. It's already hard to get to Lincoln Hills and get anywhere else throughout the state, but to send a young person to Virginia or to Texas for
how do you stay connected? Yeah. No way.
It's pretty impossible.
Right. And all of the data, all of it, I know you know this too, says that the more you isolate anybody, whether it's young people or adults from their families, the worse the outcomes are, both while they're incarcerated and afterwards, and to their families. And it is absolutely ridiculous that we're doing this. And that the conversation about replacing Lincoln Hills and Copper Lake with similar facilities closer to home is off target, right? Yeah, exactly. We should not be locking kids up, period, right? The conversation has to be around investing in our communities and our youth in a way that they don't get involved in the system in the first place, and then diverting them once they're in, rather than where the horrific prison should be. Yeah. And it's really a failure of imagination that we're talking about what the alternative is in such narrow terms.
That's horrific to really think about too hard. just kids getting stuck on this track, and that's their whole life is.
Yeah.
We just had a conversation at the county about
In the
making
jail.
a dashboard so that at any point folks from the public can come to this dashboard and see how many kids we have locked in cages. And folks that I usually agree with from DHHS were like, whoa, let's not have this dashboard. We don't want this number available all the time. There's no context to it. And I was very adamant in saying one kid in a cage is a crisis. 142 or whatever number we have right now, because I don't know, because I'd have to, ask 5 different departments where these kids are that we've locked up. Like, that's an absolute systemic failure. We need to have that number available. We should absolutely talk about the context for it, why they're there, but we need to know where they are, because even at Vel Phillips, which is the county facility, we have overloaded that facility with so many kids that they're sleeping on the floor in mattresses, which they call boats because they have pockets on the sides. And then we're exporting some of our kids to Racine County, where we have no oversight. And it is absolutely ridiculous. We need to be having that conversation. That conversation needs to start with public scrutiny of how many kids we have locked away to begin with.
And then even thinking about and we could go down the rabbit hole for hours on this specific topic, but even thinking about the overlap of services, right? More common than not, a young person, who's in a period of transition, could be, have 6 programs that they could be required to participate in, and sometimes those 6 programs, 2 out of 6 of them could be the same exact program being done by 2 other service providers.
That's kind of what I feel like happens. Yep. We spend a lot of money on these programs that we think are doing good, but there's 6 of the same thing or 2 of the same thing. Yep.
And the young person knows, right?
It's hard to invest in them if you think they're repetitive or not useful.
Yep. But we don't act, right? This is where it goes back to, again, having young people be a part of their own agency, right? We don't ask young people what, where are the mistakes being happening, because we don't trust their knowledge, right? We don't trust their intellect because they're still in this developmental phase.
Hear me out. What if we just hire a third-party consultant to give that data instead of actually talking to the kids that it affects?
Yeah, have you heard of Deloitte?
Oh man,
they're pretty good at consulting.
So I mean, we do this all the time. We ask folks when we see a problem happening with a program, with a model. What we do is we say, let's bring in this consultant, let's bring in this specialist out of who knows where, instead of going directly to the source and asking them around, how do we build the solution that makes sense.
I was going to ask you a question about that, and I think I was beating around the bush earlier. In your 14 years, have you seen that a lot? That you have to go, this real policy comes from actually talking to people, visiting the jail like Ryan did, to put these solutions forward to know what's actually happening. Do you feel like, is that special? To me, that feels special, or a hard lesson to learn that a lot of people have not learned or don't take to heart.
It's the most beautiful thing to be able to be in space with folks and really hammer out ideas that may not be refined yet, right? Because what happens is you have a conversation with folks and they'll tell you exactly what they want and what they need, right? And you'll understand, right, from your position as a legislator or administrator or so on, you'll understand the system and how and some of the barriers. So your job should be, how do we eliminate these things so that we can build the model that makes sense? And, a prime example of that is credible messengers, right? I remember, I did some national work with the National Youth Alliance for Boys and Men of Color, and I represent the Burns Institute, specifically the Community Justice Network for Youth, which is a national composition of folks who started doing the school to prison pipeline work back in the 90s, when the face of youth incarceration changed, right? Young white children who were just running away from home, to black kids who were quote unquote, creating harm in gangs and things like that, right?
Sure. And this is the 90s?
Yep.
Okay.
80s into the 90s, right?
That's right.
That's where we got the war on drugs. That's where we got a series of policies, and there's a whole binder that I can give you that just breaks down the history of youth incarceration in this country. Going back to in the beginning where it was believed that children inherently had the devil in them, and
You gotta watch
the
out for
only
them.
way to deal with that was by making them work in factories, right?
Work the devil out of them.
Yes.
Yep.
Right, and like that's when we began to again create child labor laws, right, and began to disrupt that. But then we got into a wave of incarcerating young people again through boarding schools and so on. But again,
It
going down
goes
the
along.
tangent.
And we
There's a lot,
and we
okay.
look at that as like a progression. So from like kids working in factories and mines to eventually like kids not working.
Yep.
But that's not a settled dispute for some folks on the right in Wisconsin in the legislature
Yep.
right now. In this last term, they tried to roll back protections on child labor. It is absolutely ridiculous. And Wisconsin Restaurant Association, others were all for this. They're like, yeah, we'd love to see like 13, 14, 15-year-olds working, late at night on school nights. We don't see the problem with that.
There's no sense of their
it's
safety doesn't
ridiculous.
get compromised.
Right.
They don't have.
Well, no, the
you know,
safety we're talking
education.
about here is the bottom line for restaurants, right? Who are having problems hiring things. So of course we tap into child labor. It's
Yeah,
It's
I mean,
ridiculous.
but at the end of the day, if we're thinking again, this goes back to the fight against capitalism. If we're thinking in context of making a profit, at the end of the day, people will lose. And who loses
Yeah.
first? The most marginalized.
who is looking out for the CEOs, Darrin?
Who?
Someone's got to be.
Who's gonna look out for the CEOs?
Only a couple of them. They're minority.
Let the children toil to increase corporate profits. I'm not
You
sure
know?
what the problem is.
So that makes me want to ask, what would a daily life look like as representatives if you guys are both elected? I mean, you guys would be 2 representatives out of, is it 150?
99 representatives total, 61 of which are Republicans now. And that's a tough one, right? So, I mean,
Yeah. What does that look like?
I'm used to passing a ton of legislation. I mean, by all accounts, I have written more amendments and more ordinances and resolutions than anybody in recent memory, and they've been really big things, right? That is absolutely not going to happen at the
Yeah,
state
what happens
level.
with that?
So it's a much different role, and I think those roles can be complementary. But the role of somebody in a distinct minority, not only as folks running as Democrats, but as socialists,
Yep.
is much more advocacy, and it's much more calling out the terrible things that are happening, but also having those fights and trying to put them in the larger context that Darrin is so good at in terms of saying, this is not just this is a bad policy or a horrific or a terrible policy, we should vote against it, but because this is rooted in capitalism, this is why we need to change the system behind it. We need systemic change, not just nibbling around the edges and trying to reform things that are not going to work because they're never going to work.
Cool.
So using your position to reframe the arguments,
Yep.
reframe the talk.
And then while also like again, this work can't be limited to again the our districts alone, right? We have to build relationships with the constituencies of districts throughout this entire state. And that will be a battle to again move folks further in understanding that we actually have more shared values than we have differences, and to act on that and get the legislators that they have representing them to act on those values as well. Because again, at the end of the day, good policy is good policy. What'll happen is when that is when good policy is presented by a Democrat and then a socialist, right, or two, it'll be it'll be even harder to have that battle. But if there are folks in the public that are standing with us, it'll move the needle.
What does winning look like, taking this strategy? Does this look like Journal Sentinel having favorable reviews, favorable framings of conversations? What is framing the conversation in a better light? What does that look like for us winning?
Yeah, I mean, short term, it's stopping the terrible stuff from happening. It's it's being very loud, very vocal about some of the horrific legislation that would have a very immediate, terrible effect on folks. Medium term, I think it's looking down the road to 2023. The more we can frame this and have those public conversations, even if we're writing legislation, putting it forward and having it fail, having those conversations, and knowing that in 2023 we have a chance to shake up the state Supreme Court. That would mean that in 2024 we would have a chance at maps that were not horrifically gerrymandered, and that would be the path to passing more substantial legislation than what the state's able to do right now.
Does the gerrymandered maps really have an impact?
Absolutely. I mean, it's Wisconsin is even conservatively a 50-50 state, but has 61 Republicans sitting in those assembly seats.
Numbers speak for themselves.
There's no reasonable person who can look at that and say that that's fair or equitable to anybody in any of those districts. I think the folks on the side that benefit from it, their strongest argument is, well, you'd do the same thing if you were in this position. And it's bullshit. We would not. They would not, right? It's not a football game. This is it's supposed to be representative democracy, and it's really ugly to see where that's gone.
Yeah. And so somebody might push back and say, we're going to hop back real fast. Somebody might say, Ryan, one job is enough. Why are you getting two jobs?
So I love the headline. There was one in Urban Milwaukee, and I think it was Clancy running as double dipping socialist. First of all, I got to say, there's
double dipping socialist.
That's pretty good. And I got to say, there's the potential there for a great ice cream fundraiser. I hope Darrin will join me in this. Ice cream socialism. I think 2 scoops is fantastic. And there's that article is fantastic, right? So the first half was like a love letter to me. The first was like all my accomplishments and and everything that I've done, and that the people overwhelmingly reelected me recently for that position. The second part was all the other people that have done this as a matter of course, from Sylvia Ortiz-Velez recently to folks across the state that take a state rep position as well as other ones. And then he said that I'd be double dipping into the pension fund. As it turns out, and I had to correct the record, you don't get a pension at the county at all. I would really just get one pension. But and then he put a correction at the end, but then didn't change the headline. And that's fine. The larger issues here are that if I'm ever an ineffective county supervisor or an ineffective state representative, there's a really great method for getting me out of there, and that's the elections that happen now every 2 years for both of those offices. But even my political opponents, nobody says that I'm not doing my job. I think a lot of folks on the other end would rather I do my job less.
Say you're doing your job a little too much.
Right. I'm objectively effective at what I'm doing. I also know that these are complementary positions. I know we talked before about being able to use the insight from the county supervisor position to make me a better state rep. And that works vice versa too. I mean, I'm going to be able to testify to the to the really awful impacts that that state policies have on Milwaukee County. We need advocates who have a toolkit which involves being able to craft and produce and fight for a lot of important legislation. And it's not unusual. I mean, this is the norm. It was only a problem because I was a socialist and also doing this thing that many of my colleagues do currently and everything else, and that I would expect to be paid for both positions. Just for the record, I'm looking forward to giving away as much of the county supervisor position salary that I can, which is not much. It's not a living wage.
I was going to say it's $23,000.
Yeah, it's 27.
Like
so it's increased a little bit, but it's not a family supporting wage. I didn't campaign on that, on giving away one of my salaries, because that's an equity issue. I don't ever want somebody to run for that office or another one and say, well, the norm is that I have to give away my salary.
We were talking about that, yeah.
Because that, that really reduces the number of folks who could do that. And I think many of the most, many of the most powerful advocates are coming from a position where they can't afford to give that up. So the same reporter who wrote that was like, well, why didn't you say something? And I'm like, that's not part of my platform. I love the idea that I can give more money away to the folks doing, work on the ground. And there's a ton of them that could use that. But I'm not going to run on that. That's not part of my campaign. That's just a benefit to finally having a family supporting job as well as this other one.
That's rad. And the linger only
Clancy, coming through in the clutch as always.
Yeah, we didn't tell you that this podcast appearance now costs
Right.
$500. We'll send you an invoice for it.
Nice.
To linger for one more second, are you getting a lot of help as you go forward for the state assembly job?
It's been amazing. I mean, DSA specifically, and the electoral folks and the abolition folks have been my political home for a couple of years now, and it's been phenomenal. Not just to see them, showing up to knock doors and to volunteer and to put together fundraisers and everything else, but the presence of all those volunteers of that big base kept everybody else out of the race. It is totally unprecedented that the 19th Assembly District, which is one of the highest turnout, highest fundraising districts in the state.
It is the highest fundraising district.
It is, yeah. I mean, one of them. It is the very top. And there's a lot of pressure there, frankly, that nobody else would run. So not only do I not have a Republican challenger, which is, sort of the norm, I don't have a primary challenger in August. And that means that I can knock doors for other phenomenal candidates like Darrin Madison. So it was, I think, a huge blessing, not just to this campaign and to Darrin's, but it also really reflects the idea that, like in the last one, nobody wants to run against us. Not me. Nobody wants to run against the huge number of volunteers and volunteers with this passion and basis in policy and reframing things. And that's it's a huge win. So I'm honored by it.
I find that almost surprising. Being a part of it, it doesn't seem like we're intimidating enough to keep the other dogs out of the race, but
there were folks with a lot of money out there who were trying to put people up against me in this office, and they were told no. I think not because they love me, but because they don't want to lose to us. And I think that's great, and it's a testament to good organizing, not just me as a candidate.
And that's, it speaks.
Dang.
It's, you can have a candidate who has all the money in the world, and they can pay folks to knock doors. They can pay, for ads and all of that good jazz. But it means nothing when you have people who are willing to go out and knock doors, in the blistering cold, on the hottest during the hottest
Saturdays,
of Wisconsin, because we get the highest of both, right? The coldest winters and the hottest summers, and that people are going out because they believe in the ideology, they believe in the candidates, and the candidates stay true to the values. And that's the difference, right? When folks aren't true to their values, and they're not true to the community, that shows in the way that folks, bring up legislation, the way that they show up for community, and it shows up through even the way that they show up in their actions, right? One thing that, I appreciate about Ryan in particular is that he has always been a person who has been his genuine self in every interaction that I've had with him. And that's always one of the coolest people around.
It does feel like you're talking to a real person when you talk to Ryan. It's a little surprising. I
Got you all fooled.
talked to some politicians, and it's pretty good. Much,
because there's I've had conversations with folks, and it's like you can tell that they're not really interested in having conversations with you. They're just doing the thing where they work the room and
waiting for them to talk.
Right, and it's like, dude, that's not it. And it shows up in some of their ads. It shows up in them at fundraisers. It shows up with them on the legislative floor, and so on. And that people are not moved by folks who are disingenuous, and that's shown up in our voter turnout. Even looking at this last mayoral race, it was the lowest since 1921.
Is that true? Wow.
Yeah, it was.
People were not showing up.
State of politics.
But like that, that's a trend that, our voter turnout has been decreasing, for a long time now. And we've been implementing the same strategies, pushing for the same type of leaders, and getting the same results. And people are tired of electing someone and then a few years later functioning in the same pile of crap, that they've been on
Yeah.
the promises that there would be change coming. When we sell folks a dream and we only give them crap, folks will disengage. People have disengaged in this political process, and I find it's the most saddening thing ever, to see folks without hope.
What does it take to give people hope?
You work with them. You work with them and you meet them where they are and you show up for them.
Do real world tangible
Quite
policy
tangible, right?
implementations.
Like in my last election cycle, um, when I was running for county board, I remember, several conversations with folks where it was like, I don't vote. I'm done voting.
Same.
And I was like, okay, that's understandable, but like, what do you have going on? Like, what do you need? And so on. There was one conversation I had with someone where, the conversation was related to housing and dealing with the conditions of their landlords. And I broke it down. I was like, you have tenant rights, right? Like, you could actually, you know, go through a process and ensure that your landlord is doing their job. And it's important that you know this. And what do we need to do? What can I do to help you navigate this space?
To empower you.
And that, you know, after that conversation, they were like, I still don't know if I'm voting. But if I do end up voting, it'd be for you. And I remember on election day, they called me and they were like, yeah, I voted for you. Right. And I was
Yes.
like, oh, wow. And, we had the conversation about like the process they were now going through, to get legal help to, navigate, the issues with their landlord. And it
Sure.
was good to see that, this person got the help that they needed, and I was able to facilitate that dynamic. Um, when folks aren't willing to do that, and they're not willing to show up, or they're willing to pass folks along, without like helping them navigate that process, it it results in, again, that same loss of hope. Because it's easy to tell folks like, hey, you should call this number, and like
Yeah.
you should do this, and you can do this, but like to walk with them through the process, because it's not easy to make a call to these folks and hear a bunch of information that you don't fully understand. But if there's someone who's in your corner to help you process, help you navigate, help you find the solution, that restores hope.
Yeah, and I mean, the pandemic, I think, really laid a lot of those things bare. So, like the week before my first election, I helped somebody out who was in the service industry, had been laid off, was trying to negotiate the really awful
Yeah.
unemployment system. And I helped her through that. I didn't think it was exceptional, but it took an hour or so, a couple days before the election, and she showed up at the victory party at Puddler's Hall and was just over the moon. And she said this was a really big deal, and I'm like, oh, it's my job, right? Like that's what we're supposed to be doing. And she's like, no, you don't get it. Like I ended up getting unemployment. I ended up getting that check, starting my own small business. Like here's my
Oh,
business
dang.
card. There was this big thing to it, and she wanted to show up, to because she was part of that victory as well. And I think, based on that experience and based on helping her through that process, I came to understand how terrible the unemployment,
Mhm.
system was in
Process.
Wisconsin, and that's why I want to run to change those systems. So, but it's only those interactions with individuals. I mean, Darrin started out this interview talking about that one experience, helping one person out, and then going into that larger advocacy. If you don't help out individuals, you're not going to be able to understand the system and what we need to do to change it or reform it or wipe it out and replace it with something better. And I think that's why we're both here.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it sounds like you guys both have the on the ground experience that is needed to create meaningful policy. What does that look like 10, 15 years from now? What does a ideal Milwaukee look like to you guys if you had control of the city council, the county board? What would you like to see? What would a prospering Milwaukee look like?
It's really, it's not a new sexy thing.
It's
It's
not
not like
crazy.
a new acronym or anything else. It's disinvesting in the things which we know hurt our communities. It's disinvesting in policing, right? It's taking those funds and then investing in the community and opportunity and education. All the things that the data says overwhelmingly actually make our communities better and make them safer and make them better places to be.
True.
The low-hanging fruit, it sounds like.
Right?
Yeah.
It should be.
This money's just going to the wrong place.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
True. You know, I've made it my mission to make Milwaukee a world-class city on America's First Coast. And, you know, to do that, you know, is really leaning into, you know, everything that Ryan said, but also, you know, pushing innovation in ways that we can actually build a more, you know, sustainable city and a more sustainable state. I think about, you know, the work that I've been doing. I used to do with the city of Milwaukee, to help, you know, homeowners prevent flooding, right? And like saving folks, you know, literally thousands of dollars just by, you know, installing a rain garden in their front yard.
Being
I think
educated.
about, you know, removing asphalts from you know, public school grounds and replacing that with a, you know, permeable pavement, so that we can have greener schools. I think about, you know, being able to, you know, establish, you know, opportunities for folks, to be able to not only have access to sustainable food in their communities, but be able to be a part of the process of growing that. All of these things, like Ryan said, aren't, you know, unfathomable. They're not impossible. They're being done. In a lot of other states throughout the country, in places throughout the world. California is at the closest point to ending youth incarceration in the entire state, in the United States. You know, Vermont has implemented some of the most amazing green policies in the country, and you know, all these models are out there. We just have to figure out what works for us. You know, Milwaukee County started this credible messaging program because, you know, we, you know, were able to connect folks with folks out of California who had already implemented it. They started credible messages back in 2006. And, you know, credible messages has been expanding throughout the country since then. And we're a little bit late to the party, but we see the impact, right? The impact is showing because there's a waiting list, right? And then there's a bunch of young people who have already been supported, and we think that like these models are, you know, these super amazing innovative things that we've never seen before, but they are already there.
Yeah. Anything else you guys want to talk about before we sign off?
I want to talk about how we can support Darrin together.
Yeah.
So July 9th at 5 p.m., I believe, is our joint. It was a fundraiser for me. I don't need those funds as much as I did a couple of weeks ago when we put it together. So it's a joint fundraiser. It's going to be at the Sugar Maple in Bayview, and it's going to be a ton of fun. So you can get tickets for that. We'll give you a pint glass, and just come out. It'll be a celebration of one win, and then a big push to get 2 wins out of this. And I cannot wait to work with Darrin. The best way to make that happen is to show up, both with volunteers and with your dollars, and to get him in office.
Indeed.
Perfect. And volunteering, what does that look like for your campaign, Darrin?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are about to begin and ramping up our canvassing. And we need folks to come out and knock doors, and directly connect with folks. And if you can't do that, we can, you know, set up a phone bank for you, to be able to call folks from your home, and then also a text bank. There are several ways for you to connect, help us spread the message of our shared values to voters, and We just need folks to be willing to take action with us. And
Just
you can
a
go
little
to
bit at a time.
Yep. Commit the time, and you can sign up to volunteer by, going to, DarrinMadison.com, and you can see my platform, my background, and all of the good jazz, and also that beautiful volunteer button up
On
top.
the left-hand side at the top corner, DarrinMadison.com.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
And I'll quickly endorse door knocking real fast. It's fun. You get to talk to your neighbors, talk about issues you care about, talk about issues Darrin cares about. It's fun. So enjoy it. Not enjoy it. Click on his button in the top left-hand corner on DarrinMadison.com.
And if you are looking for tickets for that joint fundraiser,
Okay, yes.
that's
Sugar
July 9th at Sugar Maple. You can go to actblue.com/donate/assembly sugar.
Assembly Sugar.
That
So
sweet,
give us some
sweet
sugar, baby.
That sounds
sugar.
fun. And these are going to be speeches from maybe you, from Darrin.
You can come for the speeches. I mean, I know both of us love giving long-winded speeches. What's really struck me in the last couple of events is just bringing together just amazing activists and organizers and folks from the community and just talking with each other. And the feeling at those is really good. And I'd encourage you to come. So, the donations are suggestions. If you want to just come out and have a drink and talk to candidates and like-minded folks, or maybe some not like-minded folks, we can convert you. It'd be great. We'd love to have you.
Indeed.
Sugar Maple, Saturday,
July 9th, 5 p.m.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. We'll hopefully see everybody there. And thank you again for sitting down and talking to us today, Ryan and Darrin.
Indeed. Glad to be here.
Thanks for having us.
All right. Well, if you've hung in this long, you're an even better human than I thought. And I'll do the classic like us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter plug. Please like and subscribe to Cream City Social wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you feel we're 5-star worthy, or our heart is at least in the right place, please rate and review us wherever you listen to podcasts. We're also soliciting guests, feedback, community announcements, short stories, cool art. Honestly, we're looking for anything to make this world a brighter, better place. Secretly, it's my dream for one of you creative listeners to send us some of your short stories, or skits, or poems that we can air at the beginning or end of the episodes. I can narrate them, you can narrate them, we can all narrate them. We can make this a community podcast. If you've got any ideas, please email us at creamcitysocial@gmail.com. Again, if your rewind button is missing, that's creamcitysocial@gmail.com. Take care of each other, and we'll talk to you next time.